Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, the sound of pistol crack that silenced the entire ballroom. But Julian didn't care about the gasps of the elite or the red stain spreading across the pristine white tablecloth like a fresh wound. He only cared about the dark, predatory eyes of the man currently stalking toward him across the shattered glass. Julian had spent 3 years poking the bear, 3 years testing the icy composure of the future CEO of Thorn Enterprises. But as Cassian Thorn grabbed his wrist with a bruising grip that promised retribution rather than brotherhood, Julian realized with a jolt of terrifying thrill that he hadn't just poked the bear. He had walked straight into its jaws. "Move," Cassian growled, his voice a low vibration that Julian felt in his marrow. Before Julian could construct a witty retort or feign the indifference that was his armor, he was being dragged. Not escorted. Dragged. Cassian, the man whom the tabloids called the Ice Prince, the man who never wrinkled his suit jacket, was hauling his stepbrother out of the catastrophic wreckage of the Solstice Gala with a force that made the security guards look away in fear. They moved through the gilded corridors of the hotel, a blur of black velvet and panicked breaths. Julian's feet barely touched the carpet. His heart was hammering against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, but beneath the fear was a molten heat that he had suppressed for years. This was the reaction he had wanted. This was the crack in the porcelain mask. "Cassian, stop, you're hurting me," Julian lied. The grip hurt, yes, but it grounded him. Cassian didn't stop until they reached the private elevator. He slammed his palm against the penthouse button and threw Julian against the mirrored wall as the doors slid shut, sealing them in a steel box ascending to the heavens. Julian gasped, the air knocked out of his lungs as his shoulder blades hit the cold surface. He looked up, expecting to see the scolding disappointment of a brother. Instead, he found the starving gaze of a lover who had been fasting for a lifetime. "You wanted my attention, Julian?" Cassian whispered, crowding his space, his expensive cologne, sandalwood and cold rain, flooding Julian's senses. He planted a hand on the mirror beside Julian's head, boxing him in. "You spent the entire evening whispering in that rival investor's ear. You spent the entire dinner brushing your knee against mine under the table. And then you spilled that wine on purpose." Julian swallowed hard, his throat dry. He tried to summon his usual bratty demeanor, the defense mechanism he used to survive in the shark tank of the Thorn family. "It was an accident. And maybe I was just bored. You're always so boring, Cassian." "Perfect, stoic, boring Cassian." "Boring," Cassian repeated, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. He stepped closer. There was no space left. Their chests were millimeters apart. The heat radiating from Cassian was suffocating. "Do you know why I ignore you, Julian?" Cassian asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous octave. "Because I'm the charity case," Julian spat back, the old wound reopening. "Because my mother was the gold digger who snagged your father, and I'm just the luggage she brought along. You hate me." Cassian let out a dark, humorless laugh. He raised his free hand and gripped Julian's chin, forcing him to look up. "If I hated you, you would have been on the streets 3 years ago when father died. If I hated you, I wouldn't have fired the entire staff at the manor last month just because the head of housekeeping looked at you with disdain." Julian's eyes widened. You said they were stealing silverware." "I lied," Cassian confessed, his thumb tracing the trembling line of Julian's lower lip. "I lie a lot when it comes to you. I lie to the board of directors about why you have an unlimited allowance. I lie to society about why you still live in the main wing. And I lie to myself, every single night, telling myself that you are just a nuisance." The elevator chimed, signaling their arrival at the penthouse suite, but neither man moved. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. "You're not a nuisance, Julian," Cassian murmured, leaning down until his lips hovered a breath away from Julian's ear. "You are an obsession. And tonight, you push me past the point of no return." Julian shivered. "What are you going to do? Send me to boarding school?" "I'm done sending you away," Cassian growled. He grabbed Julian's waist, spinning him around as the doors opened, marching him into the darkened penthouse. The suite was vast, a monument to modern loneliness, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. Rain had begun to lash against the glass, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon. Cashin didn't turn on the lights. The ambient glow from the city was enough to illuminate the predatory angle of his jaw. He pushed Julian backward until the back of Julian's knees hit the edge of the sprawling leather sofa, causing him to collapse onto it. Cashin stood over him, loosening his tie with a slow, deliberate motion that made Julian's mouth water. "I need to understand something," Julian breathed, his voice trembling. "Why now? You've had 3 years." Cashin tossed the silk tie onto the floor. He began to unbutton his cuffs, his eyes never leaving Julian's form. "Do you know how a takeover works, Julian?" Julian shook his head, mesmerized. "You secure your assets. You eliminate threats. You ensure that when you make your move, no one can challenge you," Cashin explained, his voice clinical yet terrifying. "My father's will had a clause. Moral turpitude. If I was caught in a scandalous relationship before the age of 28, the company would pass to my uncle." Julian's breath hitched. "You're 28 next week." "I secured the majority vote from the board this afternoon," Cashin corrected him. "The company is mine. The assets are mine. The house is mine." He dropped to his knees between Julian's legs, placing his hands on Julian's thighs. The heat of his palms burned through the fabric of Julian's dress pants. "And now, I am collecting the only asset I actually care about." The revelation hit Julian like a physical blow. The distance, the coldness, the cruelty, it had been a shield. Cashin had been playing a long game of 4D chess, protecting his inheritance so he could protect Julian. You calculated this." Julian whispered, horrified and aroused in equal measure. "You ignored me for 3 years for money. For power," Cashin corrected, his grip tightening on Julian's thighs. "Without power, I couldn't keep you. My uncle would have chewed you up and spit you out the moment father died. I needed to be the king to make you my queen. Or rather," Cashin's eyes darkened, "my consort." "I'm not anyone's consort," Julian tried to protest, though he leaned into the touch. "I'm your stepbrother." "This is sick, is it?" Cashin challenged. "We share no blood. We share no history prior to 3 years ago. The only thing binding us is a piece of paper signed by 2 people who are now dead." Cashin leaned forward, burying his face in the crook of Julian's neck. He inhaled deeply, a sound that was almost a growl. "You smell like rebellion, Julian. You always have." It drove me mad. Julian's hands found their way into Cashin's hair, almost of their own volition. The strands were silky, contrasting with the rigid hardness of the man. "I thought you hated me," Julian confessed, his voice breaking. "I acted out because I wanted you to look at me. Even if it was in anger. I just wanted to be seen. I see nothing but you." Cashin murmured against his skin, pressing a wet, open-mouthed kiss to the pulse point of Julian's throat. "When I sit in board meetings, I see you. When I travel, I see you. When I sleep, I dream of this." Cashin pulled back, his eyes searching Julian's face. "But there are rules now. The teasing stops. The public spectacles stop. You don't flirt with investors. You don't spill wine to get a reaction." "Or what?" Julian challenged, a spark of his old bratty self returning. "What will you do, big brother?" Cashin's expression shifted. The mask of the civilized CO fell away completely, revealing something feral. He stood up abruptly, grabbing Julian by the lapels of his jacket and hauling him up off the couch. He walked Julian backward until he hit the cold glass of the window. The city lay below them, 1,000 feet down, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the sky. Cashin pinned Julian there, one arm barring his escape, the other hand winding into Julian's hair, pulling his head back to expose his throat. "Or I will lock you in this penthouse," Cashin promised, his voice low and raspy. "I will keep you here until you forget what the outside world looks like. I will be the only face you see, the only voice you hear, the only hand you feel. I have the resources to make you disappear, Julian. Do not test my resolve." It was a threat, terrifying and absolute. But to Julian, who had spent his life feeling like an afterthought, like a piece of luggage to be shuffled from room to room, the threat sounded like something else entirely. It sounded like a promise of permanence. "You're crazy," Julian breathed, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Mad with it," Cashin agreed. He leaned in, his lips hovering millimeters from Julian's. "Now, tell me to stop. Tell me to open that door and let you leave, and I will." I will let you walk out of my life, and I will wire you $10 million, and you will never see me again. Cashin paused, his eyes intense, searching for the truth in Julian's gaze. But if you stay, Cashin continued, if you let me kiss you, you are mine. No more games. No more stepbrothers. Just you and me, and the hell we create together. The silence stretched, filled only by the sound of rain against the glass. Julian looked at the man before him. He saw the loneliness, the power, the desperate, clawing need that mirrored his own. He thought of the $10 million and the freedom it offered. It seemed cold and empty compared to the fire burning in Cashin's eyes. Julian reached up, his fingers trembling as he traced the line of Cashin's jaw. He felt the muscle tick under his touch. I don't want the money, Julian whispered. Cashin let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for 3 years. Then what do you want? Julian smirked, a dangerous, inviting curve of his lips. I want to see if the ice prince melts. Cashin didn't wait. He crashed his lips onto Julian's, a collision of teeth and tongue and pent-up starvation. It wasn't gentle. It was acclaiming. It was the breaking of a dam. Julian groaned into the kiss, wrapping his arms around Cashin's neck, pulling him closer, erasing the space between them. The storm outside raged on, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside the penthouse. Clothes were discarded, scattered like debris in a hurricane. The cool glass against Julian's back was the only anchor in a sea of sensation. Later, much later, as the dawn began to bleed gray light into the room, they lay tangled together on the oversized bed. The city below was waking up, oblivious to the shift in power that had occurred in the sky. Cashin traced the spine of his sleeping partner, his expression possessive and dark. Julian stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked at Cashin, confusion clouding his gaze for a moment before the memories of the night came flooding back. A blush rose to his cheeks. Good morning, Cashin said, his voice rough with sleep. Morning, Julian mumbled, burying his face in the pillow. So, what now? Do we go back to pretending? Cashin tightened his arm around Julian's waist, pulling him flush against his chest. I told you, the pretending is over. Today, we go down to breakfast together. We walk into the office together. And if anyone has a problem with it. Cashin paused, a cold, ruthless smile touching his lips. They can take it up with the CEO. Julian smiled, resting his head on Cashin's chest, listening to the steady, powerful beat of his heart. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like an outsider. He didn't feel like a mistake. He was exactly where he was meant to be, in the jaws of the beast. And he had never felt safer. And that is how the rebellious sparrow finally found his perch, not by flying away, but by surrendering to the hawk. If you enjoyed seeing Julian push his luck until he found exactly what he was looking for, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, is it romantic or toxic when a partner manipulates the world just to keep you safe? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,